Hi guys, hope you are well. So this is the 17th interview of my series that I started back in July last year, and today I have with me a wonderful writer, Julian Mithra. Julian Mithra has an MA in folklore. They have authored two books, If the Color is Fugitive and Kaleidoscope, with the former being a finalist from the Lambda Literary Award. Their work has been published in several literary zines and anthologies. Aside from pursuing personal creative endeavors, they teach writing in the East Bay, California. Let's welcome Julian. Hi, Julian. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. This is amazing.
So, Julian, my first question to you is, what got you into writing in the first place?
Oh, what got me into writing in the first place? I think a teacher I had in elementary school was wise enough to suggest that I keep a journal. And later that same year, there was a after school poetry writing class that she recommended that I take also. And I think like she kind of knew something intuitively about me, having like a very rich inner life, and wanted to support that like on my own terms. So I think that was really important. And I think in my more like recent writing life, actually getting a hand-me-down smartphone with a built-in audio recording app. I had been writing very little. I was like just having a really tough time at life, and I wanted to just mess around with that app. And I thought, well, I just have this like poem I was working on. I'll just see what happens when I record it. And it was it wasn't like the first time I had ever heard my voice, but there was something really magical about that, and a different element of performance that I hadn't really associated with my writing at all, and hadn't done a lot of performing or reading. And as soon as I played that, like just messing around, I was like, oh, this is what I want to be doing.
Okay, so you spoke about performing and reading poetry. So my question to you is regarding that. How important do you think is it for a writer to perform and to read their poem instead of simply writing them on a, reading nook or on a, introverted corner of a table?
Yes, well, I think for me it's been very important. So partly I think because I was writing at that time, especially I was writing more persona poems, and so there was a lot of voice through kind of like colloquialisms, and just a strong sense of voice, a strong sense of character. So for me that seemed really important. I think there's a lot of types of poems that don't really translate to being performed well, right? Like collage poems, some erasure poems, poems that are visually using the page, poems like that can be read in different ways, like the lineation could go all the way across or kind of down or move around. The time-based medium of performing, I think, works well for certain things, and the kind of visual, like painterly effects of some poems work better on the page. And I've done a lot of like collage and visual poetry in my zines that I wouldn't be able to perform them right. So I think it just depends on like how you're working. People who are working very much with like musicality and rhythm, or like what I was talking about, where there's a kind of narrative sense of voice, I think performing them can like bring so much out. And like even as a revision, like as a revision strategy, reading things, recording them, listening to them, adjusting things based on like the sound rather than like based on the language specifically, can be really helpful. But I don't think there's like poetry doesn't need more hierarchies where spoken word or like certain certain strains of performance are privileged over like the introvert in the corner who's just like, no, I just put my poetry in a book so I don't have to be there, I don't have to deal with it. I'm totally in favor of that too.
Okay, interesting. So, you are into flash fiction as well as poetry. So now, if I ask you that, what do you like writing more, or what do you like reading more? So it would be like asking a mother, which baby do you want to choose? So I wouldn't want to ask you that. My question to you is similar to that. So, what differences do you find in yourself when you are approaching both?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't written as much short fiction, especially over the course of my life, but I do think that it allows me to play with other structures that are short. So I think that when we think about like the archive with capital A, like the archive of everything that's been written, and what types of texts already exist in the world that are short and why they're short, that is one thing that I often bring to writing short things. So even like, yeah, without thinking of flash fiction, but just thinking about prose that is very compact, that would be like what I would think of as like editorial columns, um, encyclopedia entries, postcards, right? So thinking about the way that prose gets condensed, often to fit into a kind of system of information, and like a knowledge making process, or like the kind of intimacy of a postcard, this like condensed condensed communication. And that's like my research process, or like why I would decide to write something short. But I think it's less out of like flash fiction as a genre, because I don't actually know or even read that much flash fiction that has elements of like storytelling that you'd find in a longer short story into flash. And then poetry, I think, is just so much more open-ended. Like it can be anything, right? Like poetry can look like prose on the page. It can just be gobbledygook. So I feel like what I bring to poetry is much just like wide open sense of discovery. Like I can translate text messages through like some dictionary method, and what comes out is like an experiment that could be poetry.
Okay. So, what is your process of writing, and how do you usually conduct research for relevant materials for to incorporate in your writing?
Yeah, my last couple of projects have been incredibly research heavy. So my process involves a lot of reading of materials from the time period that I'm interested in. And I really want to get into print culture of that time. So for my book, Unearthingly, print culture during the Great Depression, it's kind of like the height of newspaper communication. There's many local newspapers that I looked at, and a kind of flourishing print culture of government government-based knowledge. So I looked at a lot of like the Bureau of American Ethnology reports, and kind of archaeological reports that were, organized by the government and published in these bulletins. And it's also kind of like a pulp fiction period. So there's new marketing to this like emerging adolescent readership, like Adventure, that magazine Adventure. And so I was thinking a lot about the creation of that like adolescent readership and Yeah, very juicy, cheesy types of writing. And yeah, the research, again, I wouldn't say it's as much of like a historic fiction research where I'm like trying to find out specific answers. It's really like about how is print culture affecting people's like other culture, and how is culture circulating through print. And then like I want to like do something with that language, like exaggerate it or imitate it or kind of break it down and reorganize it. And yeah, creating like texts that simulate this sort of official like record was really important for that project. Yeah, but it's just like a lot of, I mean, and then for this project that I'm working on right now, which is set during 1829, I was also trying to read like actual fiction, which I often am not am not doing, but so I read like James Fenimore Cooper and like these long novels that were not, not good. I wouldn't say I was like reading them like, oh wow, this is so good, but really just thinking about the emergence of this quote unquote like American literature, what was going into it, and how nostalgia for prior like innocent periods of America were like already getting inserted into the idea of like American identity.
I really like your answer, and I'm like thinking about my own my own
Yeah,
process of research.
I could go on. I could talk about research for so long. Like I just think that I feel so lucky that I don't have to be associated with an institution to just go online and look at, newspapers from 150 years ago, and um like yeah, a lot of scanned books that, would be difficult to get even 10 years ago. So I feel really lucky that I can access this archive for free.
So, what type of poetic forms interest you the most, and why?
What type of what?
What type of poetic forms interest you the most, and why?
Hmm. Well, I guess right now I've been more into like docupoetics, I guess. Or the illusion of docupoetics. So like I recently read Victoria Chang's obit, and it's not all of it, but the first section and the last section, and then the middle there's like they look like erasure poems. With the first section and the last section, each poem or each page is filled with these obituary looking, again, like newspaper based blocks of text, that look like a column that would appear in your local paper as obituaries. So even though they're not from like, there is no original specific document in that case, I still feel like there's this element of docupoetics where the documentation, because her obituaries are for these kind of abstract nouns and concepts and relationships that died, but they're all on very specific dates. So it kind of has this structure and a relationship, again, to like knowledge making that we're all familiar with, but then it's adapting it for um, how to talk about these more complicated griefs that aren't just about a single person, but are about like entire ways of life and entire ways of being that have just disappeared. um yeah, or like a more exact, like a more technically genre of docupoetics would maybe be like 1919 by Eve Ewing. that has some of the, like a lot of her research, but then also in kind of epigraphs and other places appear again from this government sponsored like analysis of this kind of uprising slash attack on the Black community in Chicago. So you get like that actual report, and then it kind of gets you know, translated and moves through these more intimate spaces in the space of the poem, right? But then you kind of get both of them. So I really like poetry that looks at other texts and uses like the tool of poetry to process history and like documentation, like or bears witness to things, and you know, and there's a lot of other people that do that, but that's kind of what comes to mind.
So there is this poem I was recently reading. It's called Bridging the Gap by Mary McCreed. So the first stanza of the poem says, how to bridge the gap, gorge, chasm forged by the ears of the trodden on backs of these. So how do you manage to treat complex cultural challenges in your art?
Hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, kind of what I was just talking about, where there's this relationship to kind of pre-existing and actually really old cultural challenges, like cultural challenges that we're experiencing in our lifetimes in a new, fresh way, but that are just so incredibly old. I think that it's actually impossible not to just challenge all of those existing challenges. So like doing this research about the Jacksonian era, and like, you know, I knew about Andrew Jackson from a more mainstream like history, like school history perspective, I guess. But I think that it was really important for me to read more about Jackson as a way of making sense of Trump and sort of Jackson's rise and creation of this populist white supremacist men group, of like how to empower that group successfully. And like, sure, you know, Jackson's followers like didn't read his thoughts on Twitter, but like it's really like just the rhetoric is exactly the same. And I just feel like there's no escaping it. So even though I'm kind of interested in things going on now, and but through contextualizing them in past time periods, um there's like I just think it's like the opposite. It's like, how would people ever carve out some kind of like innocent like space of privilege where it feels like you're not engaging with those cultural challenges, right? So I think that it's like, I don't know, I'm just always shocked when I'm doing historical research, like, oh, this is like very old, like how to, you know, use religion to criminalize poverty is like a very old, very old strategy.
Yeah, I can actually completely relate with what you are saying. Even in the scenario of my country, there are similar examples that, you know, we see on a daily basis. So I know what you are coming from. So my next question to you is about your upcoming book, Unearthling, which is coming out in June, if I'm not wrong.
In July
Okay.
7th.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's coming out in July. So when I think of the word unearthling, I feel I'm digging into some depths, consciously or subconsciously. So what are those depths that you have tried to dig in through your book or in your book, and what can our audience expect from your book?
Wow. Okay, that's the last question is hilarious. I think people, what the audience can expect is to have a sense of disorientation, like you're encountering this strange archive of sort of unrelated pages and clippings and torn out pages of other books and dictionaries and encyclopedias and bulletins and reports, and kind of seeing those seams, like the seams are like totally visible. And so you're really going to have to do a lot of like, like, why is this with this? And why is this with this? And why is this with this? So you're going to have to be doing a lot of seaming, I think, as you dig through this, bizarre archive of other documents. But yeah, the digging in, I think some of it's like what I was talking about before, like what the way that I make sense of what's going on is by tracing things to their origin, or at least just to like previous yeah like the title of government policies might be the same, right? Or might be different, right? But the impulse behind them is totally the same. So one thing that I wanted to kind of dig into is the movement of the KKK out of the South into the Western states, which I think is a fairly erased, repressed history. And the KKK, so the book is set in Colorado, but it could be in almost any mining town in the Western states. And in a lot of these fairly small cities, the KKK just completely ran the government. And so even though there was no official policy, and it's a little bit harder in terms of record keeping of the effect that they had on voting and businesses, on contracts related to the WPA and things like that. They're just like, yeah, very, very strong and active. And there was this huge period of quote unquote repatriation of Mexican American, mostly citizens, back to Mexico. So I really wanted to do some like more straightforward historical research about this period of repatriation, again, because of what was going on in the last administration with deportation and detaining like really young children. And I think not unrelated to that is the history of resource extraction and kind of treatments of animals, minerals, and like everything underground as this frontier. So like the kind of the way that mining destroys like ecosystems by like going underground and extracting something, so extracting ore, thinking about that kind of extractive colonial practice actually informing like symbolically informing other ways of like extracting culture and yeah, exploiting kind of sources of things underground in the American West. And then there's probably more, because you mentioned like the subconscious. I think that one of the like recurring characters, I guess, that like moves across the documents. Cheeky is she's probably like around 12 or 13 years old. And she definitely has a lot of subconscious suffering that she's escaping from, and really like quite unwilling actually to like go into and move into.
Okay. So I have this question from you, but first, if you don't have, something to read from your, book, then it's fine. But I want to ask that if you have anything handy that you can share with the audience, then I'll, make a question about it, and then, I can ask it from you. So first, I want to confirm.
Yes, actually, I found some printouts, so I didn't even have to print out anything. So that was fun. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask you a question about that. That if you want to read anything from your book, then you can read that. Okay.
Cool. Do you think I should read like one poem?
It's up to you. If you want to read one poem, it's like your thing. You can read as many as you want, but I ask usually request people to read only two, so that we can ask other questions that will with regards to the poem and stuff like that.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me think of what would be good to ask about.
I would also appreciate if you could, if you have a text of your poem, if you can send it in the chat. So if I have to ask you something about your poem, I can easily do that if it's possible.
Oh, okay. Yes, it should be possible, but I'll have to find it on my computer.
I'm so sorry. I have this really bad flu since the last few days.
Oh no, yeah, I know. I have a lot of allergies. Okay, I think I can, let me try to find this in my drive. Let's see. Hopefully it'll be the same. Okay, this looks the same. Let's put it. And put it over here. Okay, great. This is pretty short, so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so
Okay,
yeah, now I'm going to ask you, and then you can read.
great.
Okay, and this part will be edited, so like no worries.
Thanks.
So if you have to take a break or something for like 4 or 5 minutes, then you can, we'll edit this, so it's completely okay.
Okay.
Would you like to take a break? I don't want it to be too taxing for you, which is why I'm asking.
Um, no, I think I'm fine. I have all this energy.
Okay, perfect. So my next question to you is there anything you would like to read from your book for our audience?
Yes, I found some some kind of shorter pieces, since this book is a kind of, if you were thinking about like typical genre, like between prose and poetry, is kind of a mix. So so I chose like some shorter pieces. Okay, this is from the Underground Atlas, which is kind of like the Chiki's diary or journal of when she's going underground. So each time she goes underground into these abandoned spaces, she writes something about it. So this one's about Pinnacle Mine. Pinnacle Mine. Metal braces and brackets holding up the ceiling, only 4 feet from the floor, squeezing smaller as it draws to the back. A stream flowing through the narrow gauge tracks. Slurry of loose rock and gravel, braced by full timbers with the bark. Bent axles for drams. One timber dislodged, white globes blooming from rotting wood. A trill from an organ, or bristles of a mushroom broom. I pass my hand over the top of their caps, and they puff dust. Distant effects. A man dug a hole. A man chopped a tree. A man lit a torch and looked around. The fungal motes float, unseen, through the air, in search of substrate, gob of spit, moth carapace.
I really loved the poem. I simply want to ask you about your process of writing this poem as well as the title. So it's very interesting. So how did you come up with that?
Sure. Well, I thought it was, because I'm kind of working with this verticality and thinking about most of the kind of like events, I guess, of the story, even though there's not really a story. We'll just say that there's a story. Most of the events are happening in these underground spaces, right? And so I was thinking a lot about the movement kind of from like the surface to the underground, and again reading through a lot of like materials from the kind of corporatization of selling off the mining, the rights to mine underground. And so I was looking at lists of mining companies, though, like not, individual miners, from like the teens and 20s when that was being developed. And so certain mine names were just like so good, so the idea of having this underground mine be like the pinnacle of something, right? Because it was like Gold Star Mine and like a lot of like exaggerated, like A plus, like these kind of high words, but applied to the mine, I just thought was odd. Like this is like the pinnacle, but yet it's a mine. And then I was I had done some reading before. I was just like very interested in mushrooms, right? Mushrooms are so amazing. And so this fact, I guess, just about mushrooms, like how they release how they're doing their like reproductive cycle, right? Because it's like so different from a seed or something. And so I was reading about how the like a vigorous wind or like an animal or something will like launch their spores, and watched videos of that. And so I just thought it was wanted to have a moment of like these distant effects, right? That phrase distant effects actually comes up in other places. And so this this kind of like, is it a cause and effect? Like, would the mushroom have done that anyway? Thinking about like how things affect each other, because these men mining are having huge effects on the environment, and yet there's still this this organism that's actually thriving because like the people brought the wood underneath the ground, and so it's like growing in this rotting wood, and that it's a resilient organism, right? It's like the symbol of resilience. So I was also thinking about that, like what how a lot of the underground atlas things are about how like the minerals and the animals are responding to the mining, and in a lot of cases they're like angry and kind of want a revolution, but here at least it's like, oh no, I'm actually adapting and I'm resilient. I'm like, this mushroom is surviving.
It's actually a very unique and a very beautiful concept. I particularly want to ask you about the first. I want to ask you about the second last stanza, if we can call it that, and then about the last line. So, in the second last stanza, it actually really fascinates me the way you used a man, a man, a man. So it's very, it catches you, and I wouldn't tell what I like. We will, talk about it later. I want to know from you, why amen, amen, amen? Like what was your what did exactly you wanted audience to pick from this stanza when you wrote that?
I don't know about just only the stanza, but I think that the kind of destructive impulses of men come up again and again. The kind of like editorial columnist who gets to write a bunch of editorials is kind of like rhetorically destructive, I guess. He's very anti-union, anti-strike, has all this nostalgia, has all this like racist nationalism. And there's some like heroic boys in a kind of like that adventure magazine kind of pulp fiction story who are their masculinity has a certain destruction to it. And so here it's like just simplified, I guess. I just wanted like this simplified history of the American West, right? And I just feel like this is a very simple history. A man dug a hole, like this sense of discovery, right? Like unearthing something that wasn't there. A man chopped a tree, right? It's the sense of like building the infrastructure and extracting resources for his own use. A man lit a torch and looked around. So it's just like this is the action. The action is destruction at the hands of mostly anonymous men who yet are still heroicized as like frontiersmen.
You are actually calling them simple, but they're extremely powerful lines. Yeah,
Thanks.
they really fascinate me, and they are going to be with me throughout the night. At least I'm going to think about them. So that's like very powerful. The last line, gob of spit, moth carapace. This is very, this is not the kind of imagery we usually see in poems. It's very different. So how did you come up with that? And, would you like to talk about that?
Yes. Well, like I said, in the story part, in terms of how this is functioning in the story is like where, in search of substrate. So the fungus like is reproducing and trying to find somewhere that it can grow, right? So these are just ideas, these are just possibilities for where it might land. But a lot of again in the Underground Atlas, so of course Chiki's writing, and there are parts where she like lights a candle and stuff. So obviously the documentation of writing is like a fairly visual, like working in the visual senses, I guess, because you're looking at what you're writing. But her her experience of underground spaces, it means that she needs to rely much more on like the so-called lower senses. So her hearing is more acute. Her sense of touch is much more acute because she's spending a lot of time in the dark and like feeling along her way. And then her sense of smell. So I actually did like a unreasonable amount of research just about smell, like the history of writing about scent and why scent is like the sense with the least like specific language. Like adjectives of scent are like there's very few of them. The language of scent is underdeveloped extremely. So I wanted her descriptions to rely more on scent and touch, and on scent and touch of things that aren't like, there's a lot of rotting going on underground, right? There's like a lot of moisture and a lot of ruin. And so I really wanted things that were like left over. Like in another one of these, this one from the Underground Atlas, there's a flood. And so things kind of get swept underneath, debris that is kind of in this process of ruination and decomposition.
I see. The best thing I liked about this poem is that it makes me feel that the poem is happening right in front of me. I can see all these things happening right in front of me. So I think that is the brilliance of this poem, and I really loved it. So if there's anything else that you want to read.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So maybe I'll read something that's like a different format. Okay, this is good. So there's also in this archive, there's parts of like a glossary. So there's definitions. So this is the definition for prove in the, this would be in like a mining, handbook of mining, let's say. Okay, prove, verb. Coal polishes her face with a baron. Burnished etchings of railroad passages onto thick cotton sheets. She flexes her limbs, waxy sheen like a churning sea beneath a leaded cloud sheet. Caressed by slug trails in skim light, filtering through the expeditionary core, drilled down 30 hands into her strata. Her spine stiffens with balsitic arthritis, compressed presence. Then a vein thrummed as if some liquid flowed. Her density thickened at the intrusion like blood. It would be typed into the day's report that her body proofed, as if she had been a rumor of strike rumbling through the mud hogs. Above, boot stud in merriment. The drill winds up again, piercing her thigh or her bridge, her neck or her clastic undergirding, her deck or her underbelly. A pinch, a magnanimous loss, as though a boy's mean rock hold a stained glass cathedral, and for the first time, a shard of sun daggered the velvet draped over the portrait of Saint Alexander, the patron of charcoal, burning it to a cigarillo stain, then exposing his obscured face.
I'm so excited, when you first talked about the poem before reading it, I got extremely excited about it. And now that I've heard it, I'm even more excited. So I want to ask you about this poem. So how did you choose to do this theme?
Well, I had some feedback. So even though I personally had already done a lot of research, kind of etymological research, so I was like looking a lot, like I said, at like jargon of the time, right? So a lot of course, because I was interested in like mining, a lot of the jargon had to do with mining. So I was reading a lot of mining handbooks, and then I got some feedback that the sort of allusions to like the words and what these words meant specific to mining, what they meant other places, would be like good as standalone, and then also that could be a place where there's a little bit more philosophy that helps the reader figure out like what are they supposed to make of these places. These divergences or these themes. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, I love doing that. I'll totally do that. And so I think I had maybe only had one glossary entry, and then I made, I don't know, maybe like 6 or 8 of them. So part of it was just beginning with this idea of being proved. So proofing a claim is like a real thing, right? Where they do these take these samples, and then, and of course this was completely corrupt, but you take these samples and then you're kind of getting other people interested in investing in your like amazing coal plant, area or something. And I just thought that the coal, like what would the coal be thinking about this process, right? Like I wanted to give a lot of subjectivity to these non-human subjects. And so I wanted to like kind of think about like what is it like to, be pierced and kind of be drilled into as this whole, and then being sampled and being like proving your value to these people that you actually like don't care about, like that's not the value on your terms, but you're getting like inserted into this hierarchy of value beyond your consent. And I just thought that was a place to look at the kind of vulnerability and the consciousness of coal or like other ore and other, other mineral subjects.
Okay. So the way you explain, it feels like your process of reading must be very distinct from, the way we usually read a poem. So my next question to you is about that. How exactly do you read a poem? How do you approach it when you are reading it?
Oh, like when I'm performing my own poems?
No, so not just performing. If you come across a poem, so how do you approach it? How do you read it? What's your process of reading a poem?
What's my process of reading a poem? Well, I like to read poems out loud. I mean, it's time consuming to do that. Like if you're reading an entire book of poems from start to finish, maybe that could be difficult, but I like to read poems out loud. I mean, I think, like I said before about that poetry is like, I think the most open genre of writing. So yeah, I think that poems kind of teach you how to read them like as you go along. So I just try to take cues from that. I mean, if there's a lot of, yeah, especially a lot of like wordplay or a lot of sound play, that would be something that I would want to read out loud. But yeah, but then I mean, there's poems that you read as like advice or wisdom, right? They're kind of coming from the beyond. There's poems that are like very personal, like a sort of letter. Yeah, I feel like my reading strategies for poems are much more diverse than my reading strategies for other forms, right? Like I feel like this would be easier to answer about the way that I read novels, because that's like a little bit more set, right?
So, my last question to you is, what are you currently working on, and where does Julian Mitra see themselves in their literary career in the upcoming years?
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, I'm just like, first, I just want to say that I'm so grateful that I have I don't want to call it a career, but like a literary life right now. I had such a rough pandemic, like just a really, 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 really rough, bleak time. And I think that the project that I'm working on right now saved me in a lot of ways. I just completely stopped like reading and basically stopped leaving my little place.
So, my last question to you is, what are you currently working on, and where does Julian Mitra see themselves in their literary career in the upcoming years?
Oh, okay, this is a high pressure question. I am very like feel very centered in my current literary life, which is wonderful because when the pandemic hit and I lost all my jobs, I really struggled to keep like energy toward creativity. And I just had like a very bleak, isolated, really rough time. And I was not reading or like just interested in anything or inspired in anything. And so my current project that I'm kind of in the revision stages of that really brought me out of that is a um, more of a novel than Unearthingly is so far. So it's like interrelated short stories or interrelated episodes, I guess, in a alternative history of Philadelphia in 1829, just as Andrew Jackson rises to power. And the characters are these kind of rival bands of transmasculine kids, adolescents who fight a lot, fight each other, and yeah, switch sides. And it's written kind of in an idiom. So I had to develop this style, reading a lot of James Fenimore Cooper and thinking about like, in 1829, it's kind of before we think of a lot of like American writers really seriously writing, even like Hawthorne, but definitely yeah, a lot of people like don't publish until the 40s and 50s. So yeah, so the language is very strange, and then it kind of has this like queer speculative futurism, even though it's actually has a lot of historical facts and important like things specific to the Delaware River and kind of river based industry, and then being in like this pre-railroad period. So that's just like completely absorbed me, actually, like no project ever, partly because I had so much time, I think, to devote to it, and going through revising and working with this writing group that's really amazing with corporeal writing, and seeing other people's process for a long form work is like, I don't know, it's just very nourishing. This project is very nourishing, very healing, and a space for like dreaming of connection and and healing, like in that I can only muster mostly for this like imaginary space and not for what's actually going on right now. And I mean, I guess for my future, I just really like this book so much that I really hope I can find a home for it. And like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm really like, I'm very satisfied. So I think if I could like continue to be part of groups of like smart, sensitive writers and continue to like grow writing community, that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much, Julian, for your time.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And if anybody wants to connect to Julian, they can reach out to them on Twitter or as well as their email address. So thank you so much for joining me
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you everybody who listened to this. And if you want to be interviewed for this series, then you can reach out to me at fizza_abbas@outlook.com.